Welcome to the Relate Church podcast.
We are going to continue today this conversation that we've been in for a few weeks, as Ron just told us, titled Field Notes on the Narrow Way. We are looking at what it is to follow Jesus, to take the narrow way as Jesus described it. And we have been highlighting some characteristics or road markers that help us know that we're on the way that God calls us to. Jesus called it the narrow way, and we read in Isaiah 35 to begin this series that it is called the highway of holiness, that there is a way to walk that Jesus leads us in. And in these days where there is a multitude of different choices that you can make, lifestyles that you could live. There are many different truths that are out there. It becomes more important than ever that we follow Jesus and model our lives on the life that he demonstrated for us. And so as a church family, we have spent actually years going through the Gospel of John to study Jesus. What was he about? What was important to him? What did he do? What did he not do? What did he say? What did he not say? And we're kind of continuing that, in a sense, as we look at markers of holiness, this way that God calls us as his followers to live. So over the last few weeks, we've covered a few topics. We talked about living a life of consecration, or having a pure heart, living in such a way that we have consecrated our lives to God, that he gets the whole thing. Even as we sang today, you can have it all, God. I feel challenged and convicted that he wants it all, that he's not content with just like a portion of our life, or for our lives to kind of be God adjacent, but he wants our whole heart. We started with that idea that our lives are to be consecrated to him. We heard about how we are to walk with a righteous humility, with a boldness that comes from knowing who he is and who we are as his children. That we're not to shrink back or to get smaller, but instead we live our lives with boldness, with a humility that comes again from knowing who we are in relation to him. Last week I talked about having a sensitive spirit and how it is one of the joys of walking with God, and also honestly one of the greatest irritations is that your spirit just gets more and more sensitive, that the things that you used to be able to do and not feel any conflict over, no conviction about, the longer you walk with God, the more you're like, oh yeah, I can't do that anymore. I can't say that anymore. That isn't reflecting who he is and how he calls me to walk. And today I want to talk about another characteristic of life on this road, and that is friendship with God. Friendship with God. And to be transparent, this one is kind of messing with me the most. It feels like such a bold thing to say, that we are called to be friends of God. Like, who do we think we are? Friends of God. That we are designed and encouraged and made for friendship with God. But it's not my idea. It is what Jesus said and invited us into. And yet, when we think about that, it makes me take a deep breath like I just did, actually. It is humbling. It is overwhelming that the God of the universe, the eternal God who has no beginning and no end, the God who made everything that is beautiful and majestic around us, those mountains that we can kind of see today, the sun and the sky and the trees and all of you sitting here with me today, he made all of it. And the God who holds it all together, he invites us into relationship with him. In fact, he longs for relationship, and not just relationship, friendship with us. He longs that you would know him and be fully known by him. That is what he's after. And we know this because he went to impossible lengths to make that possible. Because Jesus went to the cross to show us what his love, his heart toward us looks like. He delights in our company. And if you would go to John chapter 15, I will start here because I can't not. We might be stuck in John for a while, you guys, because it's full of gold. But I want to begin by reading John chapter 15, verse 15. Jesus' words here in my Bible, it's in red. And he says, I no longer call you servants, because the servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. Jesus, I thank you for your word. These are your words right here. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the relationship that you extend to us, this invitation you give to all of us. God, I pray that you would help us in these few moments together to better see your heart, to better understand how you see us and our place here in this world, the design, God, that you have formed us and shaped us to inhabit. We need your help today. So Holy Spirit, would you reveal Jesus to us? Amen. Amen. That is what Jesus said. He calls us friends. A relationship that goes beyond rabbi and student, or beyond leader and follower, beyond master, servant, and instead friends. We're called and invited to be friends of God. That was his intention in creating you and I in the beginning, that we would know him and be known by him, that we would walk with him and talk with him in the cool of the day like Adam and Eve did, a friend of God. That we would have a shared life with him, shared knowledge, as he says here in John chapter 15, shared plans, a shared trust and an intimacy, that we would be friends of God. This is the way of holiness. It is to live as a friend of God. Teresa of Avila defined holiness as friendship with God. She wrote this, "For prayer is nothing else than being on terms of friendship with God." And I want to talk about that today. When she wrote that, that was in the 16th century. And it was a new way of thinking, because it meant that holiness wasn't reserved just for those who were leaders in the church. It wasn't reserved just for men. All of a sudden, women were included and could walk in the way of holiness, according to this definition. It was a definition of holiness that was applicable to men and women and clergy and lay people, and that is to walk in friendship with God. And today, as I begin this, I actually wanted to demonstrate something that has been a picture that has helped me better see the invitation that God gives to us. And so I'm going to ask my son, who's around here somewhere. Miller, will you come and join your favorite mother? Oh, he's coming from the back. Doo-doo-doo. I recently read a book called Beholding. It's by Strawn Coleman. And he is an author from New Zealand. And he talks about a tradition in New Zealand that is something that is extended by and participated in by the Maori people. Now, I don't want to appropriate something that isn't mine, and so I'm just going to use his description as a way of helping us better understand what this could look like. But if you've been to New Zealand, or if you are a Kiwi, do we have any Kiwis in the room? You're nervous because you think I'm going to come and make you demonstrate this. Has anybody been to New Zealand? My dad, my husband have. I have not. Okay. Well, there is something that is called the hongi. Have you seen this demonstrated? And so that's why now you understand why I've asked Miller to come and do this with me. You have to come right up here with me. I told him I wasn't going to make him speak, but I was going to need him for a moment. So the hongi is a way that the Maori people would invite you into their space, onto their land, and extend friendship to you. In fact, it's a way of, like, as I'm already getting close to my son, sharing one space. And this is what they do, and it might be tricky because you're wearing a hat, but we'll just make a go of it. We need to touch noses. I'm going to do the mic right here. Okay. And then with one hand you shake hands, and then put your other around, like this. Okay. And we're going to go like this.
Hello. What do we do?
And I'm trying to make him uncomfortable, but I'm his mom, so it's okay. You'll notice that we're sharing breath, right? We're also sharing, do it like this a little bit so the people over there can see.
Do we go this side now?
Okay. This is not traditional, guys. But we're sharing breath and we're sharing space, right? Into a private space. Thank you, I love you so much. Please thank my son for demonstrating that for me. I don't know how accurate it was. But what it is a demonstration of is that you are extended this invite as you come into someone's space or land. And there is a very intimate, the boundaries get broached there as you actually put your noses and faces together and share breath. There is a shared breath or a shared life force that is exchanged right there. And it is a beautiful expression because what it means is that I welcome you into my space. And if you are greeted in this way, it isn't just a handshake in the way of my people. Actually, my people tend to do a quick kiss, which makes Rod uncomfortable. And so his people have become my people, and now we don't necessarily kiss when we greet family. But anyhow, regardless of what that looks like for you. In this context, it is a way of saying, as you come in, now you are my people. This space is yours as well. As long as we're sharing it together, you are welcome here. And it makes me think of, and the reason that the author of this book shared it is because you can't help but see that demonstration, which to the Maori people is a way of signifying that we are all one, that we belong to each other, and that we also belong to the land. There's a oneness and a unity that is expressed, a oneness of thought, purpose, desire, and hope. And you can't help but read that and think of the sharing that happened in Genesis. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. The Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. We read this and we are reminded of how when God created us, we woke up, if you will. We took that first breath in connection with, face to face with God, in a divine hongi, sharing breath, sharing a life force. And it was here in direct contact with our Creator that heaven breathed life into earth. It was this full, life-giving embrace, not just a ritual, but God actually giving us our breath. And when we remember how God made us, as he breathed life into us, it reminds us of how our breath is in fact his breath because he gave it to us first. And then as you think about how the hongi is a hospitable act, it is something that is extended to visitors so that you are no longer a visitor. In fact, now you are our people while I share this space and land with you. It is not a contract, but it is a welcome to a shared sacred space. In the same way, there is this sacred invitation from God that has been extended to us. And we too are welcomed as his own. We are welcomed into his space, a holy God who had created a holy, beautiful world, invites us into this shared, sacred place, and he invites us to be caretakers of what he has created, to love it as he does, to love his creation in the way that he does. And this is a divine responsibility that he extends to us. Of course, we know the story, and that we chose to turn away from that embrace. We turned inward, we turned aside, and that connection, the shared breathing, the shared stare, the intimacy, it changed over time. Which is why when Jesus came and he died and was resurrected, and then as he prepared his followers for what life was going to look like, he met them, and again, he breathed his spirit upon them, which makes this moment so beautiful and actually so startling that he breathed on them and he gave them again this breath of life, the sustenance, the Spirit of God, as we've discussed, that isn't just around us, but is now within us. In John chapter 20, verse 21, Jesus said, he's saying this to his people, his followers, his disciples, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." The way of holiness is walked in close proximity with God. This is the heart of God, that we would receive his breath, that we would walk with him, that he would be in us in him, that together we would be unified by what he has given us. Jesus, as he was preparing his disciples for his death earlier in that conversation, John chapter 14, he said this, "Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them." This is interesting, that according to Jesus, love means keeping his commands. He says here, "Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me." And according to Jesus here, we know that his heart is that we would live in him and him in us. He says, "I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you." So even beyond just a face-to-face connection with God, now we're invited into the conversation, into this Trinitarian union. He invites us to be part of what's happening. We're invited into the communion or the community of God himself. And then he says, love means keeping his commands. And we know that according to Jesus, friendship with him means keeping his commands. John 15, if we look at this scripture that I read earlier, where he says, "I no longer call you servants," the verse before, verse 14 says, "You are my friends if you do what I command." And we can read that and think, well, that is an interesting definition of friendship, because it doesn't necessarily apply to my friendship with you in the same way. If you were to come to me and say, "Listen, I want to be friends. This is what it's going to take. I need you to obey my commands, and then we will be good friends." That would sound like kindergarten, grade 1 kind of playground negotiation, right? I might have said that as like the bossy eldest child trying to make friends on the playground. I don't remember. It doesn't apply in the same way. But if you think about who God is, and the fact that he vulnerably exposed his heart and his breath to us in creation, the God who chose to make us out of love and longing for relationship and to invite us into what he was doing, the creation that he was making happen, that he was just kind of getting started, the God who is after our hearts. If you think about who he is and then the invitation of friendship that he extends to us, it makes sense that for God to obey him, to keep his commands, to be obedient is an extension of our friendship or relationship with him. Because if I love him, then I love what is dear to him, what's important to him. In the same way that if I love you as a friend, what is important to you, though it may not be important to me in the same way, I value it because you value it. Your family matters to me because you matter to me. For us to be in connection with God means that we hold dear what he holds dear, that what he values becomes what we value. It's impossible to walk in step with him and to have a secure connection with him if we find ourselves having a completely different set of values or priorities, if we are facing away from him. And so to walk with him is a constant turning toward. It is a obeying. It is a keeping in step with. It is a following him. It is an obeying him because that is how we demonstrate where our heart is. We can get it twisted because we think that if I obey him, then that is proving that I love him. And so I need to do the things, the commandments, the laws, and that is going to add up to the love. But instead, when we look at who God is and how he invites us in, we see that all the things that we do are an output of that connection or love that we have for him. It starts with friendship. It starts with love. And that doesn't mean that morality isn't involved. It doesn't mean that what we do isn't important. It's really important to God. But it is secondary. What comes first is the fact that we are loved. We are invited. We are included. And as that settles into our minds and our hearts and our bones and our habits, it changes our behavior and the way that we act, the things that we think are important. Keeping his commands is aligning with his heart, agreeing with who he is, aligning with his way, valuing what he values. June 25th is a big day. It's coming up soon. And Rod and I were just talking recently, and I realized, oh my goodness, this is 30 years since our first date. Which also means that it's 30 years since I graduated from high school, because my high school grad was our first date. And I know you're shocked by that. How has it been 30 years when I look like I'm 30 years old? It's the weirdest thing. I know. I'm trying to wrap my head around it too. But on June 25th, which we noticed because it's a Sunday, so we're scheduling Sundays, we will celebrate 30 years since our first date. Now, I was only 18 years old back then. Now you know how old I am. It doesn't matter, whatever. I have lived all of those years with joy. And yeah, whatever. I'll be quiet about that. When we went on our first date, I already knew I was going to marry this guy. We had a little bit of a wait before we could even date. I'll tell you that story another time. But anyhow, my heart was already leaning heavily toward him. We went on a date, and then within a year and a half, we were married. And now it's been many, many, many moons and many years, and we have 2 beautiful children, and life has been all kinds of wonderful. He didn't know what he was signing up for when he married me, and I had no idea what I was signing up for when I married him, because that's just how life goes, right? But when you think about a friendship or a covenant relationship, and I'm using the example of a marriage today, but it's wild to think about how when we were married and said our vows, we were fully married. Our marriage, our union that day was whole. We were married. We couldn't be more married than we were that day. We had agreed and said yes to one another. And you would all say, yeah, absolutely, that's true. Or if you think about a friendship, it begins as you both say yes to each other. You can't become more friends, you're friends. But there is something that happens over time as you continue to turn toward one another and you continue to say yes to one another, although there may be all kinds of other temptations or reasons to say no, or maybe there are distances or gaps in relationship, but you continue to come back together. As beautiful as our relationship was, however many years ago, I wouldn't trade it for what we have today, because over time, there has been a development of that union. There has been a testing of the trust that is between us. There have been highs and there have been lows, and you continue to show up for one another and say yes to one another. And though that marriage was whole on the very first day, today I think it is more beautiful and more meaningful and more deep than it was back then. It looks different. We look very different. But it has developed and grown over the years. And in the same way, the moment you say yes to God, he makes you holy. He makes us justified. He makes us righteous. He puts us in right standing with him. The moment we say yes to him, there is a beautiful relationship that is whole. He makes you whole. Salvation is miraculous, and it happens in a moment. And then there is a walking out of that relationship and commitment that has an opportunity to deepen over time, that can be trusted over time as it is tested. And God invites us to walk along with him, not just as somebody who is following him and trying to figure out where he's going so we can do the right thing, but instead to walk along with him as friends of God. And that is maybe the thing I hope we take away today more than anything, is that the good news is not transactional. And you probably already know that, and yet we tend to act and live as if it is. It isn't a transaction. God is not after just signing some paperwork and making a balance sheet even out. Are you good enough? Are you performing well enough? Instead, he is always about relationship, which is messy. And we don't do it perfectly, but he isn't about perfect. He wants us. Sometimes, if you're like me, somebody who likes to just do the right thing and feel like you're checking the right boxes and making that balance sheet even out, you may prefer a walk with God that looks like a good performance, being good enough, because it might make you feel safe. How could anybody judge me? Look what I'm doing. Look how responsible I am. But that isn't what wins his heart. That isn't what he is after. He's not after the perfection. He isn't after the performance. He wants your heart, the guts of who you are, your soul. He wants you to know him as we know a friend, and he wants you to be known by him. As we were praying this morning before service, Ali had mentioned, Ali who's on our worship team up here, that there is a vulnerability on behalf of God as he opens his heart toward us. And then he invites us to take, I'm rephrasing what you said, but to take the mask off to be known by him. And that is deeply scary, I think, for all of us in different ways. But if you think about what it is to be a friend is the person that you'll invite over when you don't have any makeup on. Some of you are like, yeah, obviously, but maybe for me that's a big deal. You see me without my eyebrows, we are tight. Or my kitchen is a mess. I haven't cleaned the bathroom yet. Sometimes we have our community coming over today, and sometimes I think I'll just test how I feel about this by leaving a few things out. I haven't done it yet. I want it to be okay. Eventually, that relationship will be so secure that I'll just say, come on in. But that would be a work of God. It isn't transactional. Friendship is always about relationship and not about function. And you know this because how would you feel about a friend who wanted to be close to you so that they could leverage that relationship? The influence, perhaps, or the title, or the status that you have. How would that make you feel if you had a friend who was after that and you knew it? Or how would it feel if you had a friend who processed deep things with you only to turn around and share those secrets with somebody else? Think about how you would feel about a friend who valued your relationship because of the gifts that you gave, the things that you were able to provide for them. Imagine if you knew that that was a motivating factor in your relationship with a friend. Now, all of these things can be really beautiful in a friendship. Good friends give good gifts, and they do show up for one another, and they do what they can to promote the other. But that is not at the heart of the relationship. It is about the relationship. It's about the connection first. That isn't friendship if it's based on what you can provide for the other. And when I think about that, I wonder how God feels sometimes with us and how we estimate or how we position ourselves in connection with him. Instead, friendship is a divine responsibility, and it is a privileged position. It is a connection that is always forged in the fire. It grows stronger through challenges. It is developed in the thin places. Proverbs 18:24 says, "There are friends who destroy each other, but a real friend sticks closer than a brother." Proverbs 27:6 tells us, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy." Friendship doesn't mean that it's always light and easy and simple. And instead, it often means that you are challenged and that you say the hard things because that's what friends do. And at the same time, you show up for one another and you celebrate one another when you are winning. It is a life of consistently turning toward, where all of life becomes prayer. As Paul wrote, he talked about praying unceasingly, and that is what friendship with God looks like, where our whole life becomes a communication with him, a connection with him. Eugene Peterson wrote about how if you were to observe his prayer life, you would find him in the mornings. He talked about how you could look through a keyhole, and you would find him in the mornings with his Bible open, talking to God. And he explained how that actually, though you would define that as his prayer life, that wasn't his prayer time. He talked about how that time in the morning, though it is important and a beautiful anchoring practice for all of us, I can't imagine not starting my day with a conversation with God. But he said that that is actually where his prayer life began. That time was what allowed him to put aside other distractions and align himself with the heart of God, so that then he could go about his day and begin praying. And I love that picture, because that is really what God calls us to. Not just occasionally connecting with him, but always living in union with him. Where those times that we set aside to pray, to be together with the family of God as we are today, to be in the house of God, to pray and worship together. That isn't like the mark of our walk of holiness, but instead it's just the beginning of what we walk out. That is what God longs for, and that is what I am longing for more of too. For me and for us, for the people of God, that we would consider the invitation he's given us, that he includes us, and he welcomes us, and he loves us, and he gives us grace and mercy so that we find ourselves with him, friends of God. Gerald Hughes said this: "The call to holiness is the echo of God's longing for each of us." The call to holiness is the echo of God's longing for each of us. So as I wrap up today, today's note on the narrow way is this: that a holy life is a life of friendship with God. My parents taught me to choose my friends wisely. You've probably heard this before, that show me your friends and I'll show you your future. That you are or will become a reflection of your closest friends, those that you walk with. And so today, I guess I want to just ask, as I am asking my own self, do you know Jesus? Do you know him? Do you know this friend that I'm talking about and that the Bible tells us about? Do you know him? He knows you. He knows you. He knows what you walked through this week. And he knows what is heavy on your heart today. He knows what you are praying as you drove here today, what you're hoping for. He knows, and he loves you. He wants to know you in that intimate, face-to-face, shared breath, shared connection kind of way. He longs that when you're processing something, you'd find him and do it like this, going to him first and allowing his breath to fill your lungs, allowing his spirit to bring you the wisdom that you need. Do you know him? I pray that you would. I pray that you would know him. And that if you know him today, your heart would feel what mine does, that I want to know him more. I want to understand him better. I want to see what his heart beats for, and that mine would beat for it as well. And those aren't just nice words. That is what I'm longing for and what he calls us into. That is the invitation that he extended to us at the very beginning, and the one that Jesus made possible as he came for us and died for us and rose again. That we wouldn't be distant or trying to earn our way in, but that we would know that connection and relationship every single day. Not just on Sunday when we have a glimpse of his goodness. I hope you do today, but every day of the week.
Thanks for listening to this week's message. If something stood out to you, if you'd like to submit a prayer request, or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get connected, email relate@relatechurch.ca. If you'd like to partner with us and our community initiatives, please visit relatechurch.ca/give. It's been an honor to spend this time with you. Catch you next week.